I reached the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston on a crisp October evening, my hands shoved deep within the pockets of my worn-out jacket. The biting wind cut straight through the thin fabric. It had been 3 months since I'd last held steady work, and my bank account was flirting dangerously with zero. The advertisement in the newspaper had been rather vague. They needed a night custodian. The hours were unusual, but the pay was good. At that moment in my life, I couldn't afford to be picky about hours. Good pay was my only priority. The museum loomed large against the darkening sky. I ascended the stone steps, my shoes scuffing against the worn surface. The main galleries were in the process of closing, and the final few visitors of the day brushed past me on their way out. After asking a security guard for directions to Thomas Green's office, I was pointed toward a room tucked away from the bustling main hall. I knocked on the door, doing my best to appear more composed than I actually felt. "Come in, Mr. Bennett," a voice called from within. Behind a desk cluttered with papers and various small trinkets sat Thomas Green. He was an older man, perhaps in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He was dressed in an expensive suit that likely cost more than a month's rent for my apartment. His eyes immediately assessed me. "You're punctual." "The compensation is $25 an hour, paid in cash at the conclusion of each shift," Thomas continued. "That's significantly above the market rate for this type of work, as I'm sure you're aware." My eyes widened. It was more than double what I'd anticipated. With that kind of money, I could get current on my rent and maybe even start chipping away at my credit card debt. "When would I start?" I asked, pushing my reservations aside. "Tonight, if you're available. The shift runs from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I gave a firm nod. "I can start tonight." Thomas handed me a set of keys. "These will grant you access to every area you need. The security system is already programmed to recognize your presence. Any questions?" I had 1,000 of them, but none that seemed likely to yield straightforward answers. "No, sir." "I think I understand." "Excellent. I'll be back at 6 a.m. to review your work. Good luck, Mr. Bennett." After a brief orientation on the cleaning supplies and their locations, Thomas departed, leaving me alone in the vast, empty museum. For the first hour or so, the job was entirely mundane. I dusted display cases, vacuumed carpets, and cleaned the public restrooms. The museum was quiet, but not in an unsettling way, just the typical creaks and groans of an old structure settling for the night. Around 9:15 p.m., I wheeled my cart of supplies toward the very old Egyptian exhibit. That's when I first detected it, a strange, unsettling noise emanating from the direction of the basement door. It sounded like someone in distress, a low moan that fluctuated in pitch. I stopped dead in my tracks. The sound came again, slightly louder this time. I glanced at my watch, 9:18 p.m. The very first rule on my list explicitly forbade going near the basement until 12:30 a.m. The moaning now seemed to be trying to form words I couldn't quite decipher. Recalling Thomas's emphasis on precise adherence to instructions, I muttered to myself, "Not my problem," until 12:30, and steered my cart firmly in the opposite direction, cranking up the volume on my earbuds. The next time I checked my watch, it was 9:42 p.m. I had 3 minutes to deal with the tripping hazard in the lobby. I made my way there, wondering what I might find, a torn piece of carpet, perhaps, or a broken tile. What I saw, however, stopped me cold. In the very center of the marble floor lay a dark, pulsing mass, roughly the size of a basketball. It wasn't solid in any conventional sense. It seemed to shift and morph every few seconds, sometimes stretching out a tentacle-like appendage before contracting again. Its surface glistened oddly in the dim emergency lighting. My mouth went dry as I swallowed hard. That is not a normal tripping hazard. Remembering the instructions, I kept my eyes averted, focusing only on the floor immediately around it. Grabbing a mop from my cart, I cautiously approached. Using the handle, I prodded the mass, attempting to push it toward the janitor's closet across the lobby. It resisted at first, then slowly began to yield as I applied more pressure. It left a thin, clear trail on the floor that evaporated almost instantly. I continued pushing, meticulously keeping my gaze fixed on the floor rather than the thing itself. Just as we reached the closet door, the mass suddenly elongated with alarming speed, stretching a dark tendril toward my ankle. I let out a startled yell and jumped back, nearly losing my balance. The tentacle-like extension writhed in the air for a moment, as if searching for me. Using the mop, I shoved the thing the final few feet into the closet and slammed the door shut. Leaning against it, I panted heavily until I heard a soft thump from within, followed by silence. I stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just transpired. That thing, whatever it was, had deliberately tried to grab me. It had moved with purpose and intent. "I'm losing my mind," I whispered to the empty lobby. That's the only explanation. But I knew what I'd seen, and what had nearly wrapped itself around my ankle. I checked my watch again, 9:51 p.m. I still had to lock the main entrance by 10 p.m. As I walked across the lobby on unsteady legs, the thought of walking straight out those doors and never coming back was intensely tempting. But then the reality of my situation set in my empty bank account, the past due notices, the disconnection warnings. I thought about the difficulty of finding another job that paid this well and asked so few questions. $25 an hour, I reminded myself. Just follow the rules and collect the money. I secured the front doors at exactly 10 p.m. and then resumed my regular cleaning duties, checking the locks every half hour as instructed. As the night wore on, the museum seemed to grow more unsettling. Shadows flickered at the edge of my vision. Exhibits I could have sworn were securely behind glass now appeared exposed. But every time I turned to look directly, everything was perfectly normal. I questioned my sanity repeatedly that night, but my financial situation provided a simple, cold answer: I couldn't afford to quit. I checked the front doors at 10:30 p.m., pulling on the handles twice to ensure they were secure. With the museum now completely sealed off from the outside world, the atmosphere shifted. The building felt different at night, not just quiet, but watchful. The eyes of ancient statues seemed to track my movements as I pushed my cart down the main corridor. I found comfort in the routine of normal tasks, emptying trash, wiping down glass. Still, every squeak of my cart's wheels made me jump, though I attributed it to nerves and my earlier encounter. At 11 p.m., I checked the doors again. Still locked. I returned to the American wing, dusting the frames of oil paintings depicting stern-looking colonial figures. In the dim emergency lights, their painted eyes appeared far too knowing. I kept my back to the walls whenever possible. The next few hours fell into a rhythm: clean for 30 minutes, check the doors, repeat. Each time I confirmed the locks were secure, I felt a small sense of accomplishment, like I was mastering this bizarre job. Between checks, I used my earbuds to drown out the unexplainable sounds, faint whispers from empty rooms, the scraping of what might have been furniture moving with no one there to move it. I turned up the volume and pretended not to notice. The Egyptian exhibit, in particular, deeply unnerved me. The sarcophagi seemed poised to open, and the glass eyes of the canopic jars appeared to turn in my direction. I hurried through that section, nearly knocking over my mop bucket twice. By 2 a.m., exhaustion had set in, but I forced myself to stay alert. I performed another door check, still secure, and continued cleaning in the European art section. At 2:28 a.m., as I was wiping down a bench, a cold draft brushed against the back of my neck. The air shouldn't have been moving in a sealed building. I stopped, rag in hand, and listened. The museum had gone utterly silent, no creaking floors, no humming ventilation, just complete stillness. I checked my watch. 2:29 a.m. time for another door check. Hurrying down the hallway, I turned the corner into the lobby. What I saw made my stomach lurch. The massive front doors stood open about 6 inches, letting in the night air. The locks I had verified every half hour, the locks I had personally ensured were secure 6 times already, were now undone. I ran to the doors, my footsteps echoing loudly. My first instinct was to close them, to bar whatever might be outside. But then I recalled Thomas's instruction, verify the doors remain locked. They weren't locked. They weren't even fully closed. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. The list of rules suddenly felt profoundly important. If this rule was broken, what was I supposed to do? Thomas hadn't provided a protocol for finding the doors unlocked, only to ensure they stayed locked. Then I remembered my 4th instruction, at 4 a.m., tell the suited man in the 2nd floor exhibition room that the museum is closed. That was still over an hour away. What was I supposed to do now? A memory surfaced, Thomas's parting words. Follow the instructions precisely. If there was no instruction for this specific situation, I needed to fall back on the general ones. The break room. I needed to get somewhere safe until my next scheduled task. I turned and ran, no longer caring about the noise. The break room was in a staff-only area near the administration offices. I fumbled with my keys, found the right one, and burst inside. It was a small, unremarkable room with a table, chairs, a refrigerator, and a coffee maker. But it had a door that locked from the inside. I slammed it shut, threw the deadbolt, and retreated to the far wall. For several minutes, I stood there in the darkness, listening to my own ragged breathing. Then I heard it, footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy, deliberate steps that didn't sound like they belonged to anyone who should be in the museum at this hour. The footsteps stopped directly outside the break room door. I held my breath. A long, slow scratch dragged down the outside of the door, like something sharp being pulled across the wood. Then another. And another. The scratching continued, steady and deliberate, as if whatever was out there was testing the door's strength. The handle jiggled, once, twice, then with increasing force. The entire frame shook as something on the other side tried to force its way in. I pressed myself against the wall, praying the lock would hold. The assault on the door continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The rattling grew so violent I thought the handle might snap off. The scratching became more frantic, shifting from methodical lines to wild, angry gouges. And then, without warning, it ceased. I remained frozen, straining to hear any sound from the hallway. Nothing. The silence was almost worse than the noise had been. I checked my watch, 3:22 a.m. Still not time for my next task. According to the rules, I needed to stay put. The next 38 minutes were the longest of my life. I didn't move from my spot against the wall, barely daring to breathe. Finally, my watch showed 3:59 a.m. It was time to face the suited man. I unlocked the break room door with trembling hands and peered into the hallway. Empty. No sign of whatever had tried to get in. The door itself looked normal, no scratches, no evidence of the violent attempt. I made my way cautiously to the stairs and climbed to the 2nd floor. The exhibition room was at the end of a long corridor lined with landscape paintings. The door was closed. At exactly 4 a.m., I opened it. The room housed a collection of portraits from various eras. In the center of the room, with his back to me, stood a tall figure in a black suit. He was perfectly still, facing a large painting of a Victorian-era gentleman. I swallowed hard, recalling my instructions. My voice emerged as little more than a whisper. "Sir, the museum is closed. You need to leave." The figure remained motionless for a moment. Then he turned to face me in a manner that defied normal movement. I had expected to see a security guard, or perhaps another employee. What I saw instead filled me with abject terror. The man, if he could even be called that, wore a black suit that hung loosely on his gaunt frame. His face was almost human, but where his eyes should have been, there were only empty, dark sockets. A thick, black, viscous fluid dripped from these hollows down his face. "I belong here," he stated, though his lips barely moved. The voice seemed to emanate from everywhere at once, the walls, the ceiling, from inside my own head. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but I remembered Thomas's words, "Follow the instructions precisely." I had delivered my message. Now I needed to leave. "I'm sorry. I'll go now," I said, backing toward the door. The suited man made no move to follow. He simply watched me with those terrible, empty voids. As I retreated, I closed the door between us with shaking hands and turned the key in the lock. I leaned against the wall, barely able to breathe, so great was my fear. What I had just witnessed was impossible. People don't have empty eye sockets leaking black fluid. Voices don't come from everywhere at once. But I couldn't deny reality. The suited man was real, and he was inside the museum. And for some reason, Thomas had known he would be. I stared at the locked door, trying to comprehend what I had just seen. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I checked my watch. For 05 a.m. nearly 2 hours remained in my shift, and I had no idea what to do next. Thomas's list contained no instructions for after informing the suited man to leave. I pulled it from my pocket, scanning the wrinkled paper for anything I might have missed. Nothing. Just for simple rules that now seemed utterly inadequate for the reality of this museum. I backed away from the exhibition room door, keeping my eyes fixed on it, half expecting the suited man to simply walk through it. But the door stayed closed. Moving quietly, I returned to the stairwell and descended to the first floor. For the next hour and 55 minutes, I cleaned areas as far from both the exhibition room and the basement as possible, checking the front doors every half hour as instructed. They remained locked, though I no longer trusted that fact to mean anything. At 5:55 a.m., I gathered my supplies and waited in the lobby. I had survived the night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something beyond the normal boundaries of reality. Thomas arrived at exactly 6 a.m., walking through the doors as if it were any ordinary morning. He wore the same impeccable suit, looking well-rested and composed. "You followed the rules." "Excellent," he said, his gaze lingering on my face, taking in what must have been a haunted expression. "First nights are always the hardest." "What was that thing?" I asked, my voice strained. The man in the suit, his eyes. Thomas raised a hand. "I'd prefer not to discuss our residence in such an open setting. Let's talk in my office." I followed him down the corridor, struggling to maintain my composure. Once inside his office, he closed the door and settled behind his desk. "You encountered him, then?" Thomas inquired, his tone matter-of-fact. "He had no eyes," I confirmed. "Just black fluid where they should be." Thomas nodded, unsurprised. "And you told him the museum was closed?" "Yes." "He said he belongs here." "He does, in a way." Thomas opened a drawer and produced an envelope. "Here is your pay for the night, plus a bonus for handling the situation appropriately." He slid it across the desk. I opened it to find a stack of crisp $20 bills, more than the agreed-upon amount. "There's an extra 100 in there," Thomas said. "Consider it hazard pay." I stared at the money. $200 for a single night's work. I thought about my empty refrigerator, the past due rent notice, the stack of bills waiting at my apartment. "Will he be there again tonight?" I asked. "Perhaps. Perhaps not. Our residents follow patterns, but they are not entirely predictable." Thomas folded his hands on the desk. "So, Mr. Bennett, will you be returning for tonight's shift?" I should have said no. Any rational person would have walked away. But the money was a more potent force than my fear. "Yes," I said. "I'll be back." A brief, humorless twitch of his lips that didn't reach his eyes was Thomas's only smile. "Excellent. I have a new set of instructions for tonight." He handed me another sheet of paper. This list contained just 2 items. 1. At 1:15 a.m., place the tribal mask from storage room B on the pedestal in the East Wing's African art exhibit. 2. At 3 a.m., play the vinyl record marked with a red dot in the multimedia room. "That's it?" I asked, looking up from the paper. "What about the basement, the lobby thing, the front doors?" "Different nights have different requirements," Thomas explained. "The museum has rhythms, patterns that must be maintained. And if I don't follow these new instructions? What happens then?" Thomas leaned back, studying me. "I'd rather not discuss hypotheticals, Mr. Bennett. Simply follow the instructions as written." His deliberate vagueness unnerved me, but I tucked the paper into my pocket. "Where's storage room B?" "Down the hall from the break room. The mask will be on the 3rd shelf, wrapped in burlap. Handle it only by the edges." Thomas stood, signaling our meeting was over. "I'll see you at 6 a.m. tomorrow." I left the museum and walked home in the early morning light, the envelope of cash zipped securely inside my jacket. The logical part of my brain screamed at me not to return, but my bank account vehemently disagreed. I needed this job, no matter how strange it was becoming. I spent the day sleeping poorly, plagued by dreams of empty eye sockets and black liquid. By evening, I had convinced myself that stress and exhaustion had exaggerated everything. Perhaps the suited man was wearing a costume. Perhaps it was all an elaborate test Thomas had devised. I showed up for my second shift 10 minutes early. Thomas met me in the lobby, gave me the keys, and reiterated the importance of following the night's instructions exactly. Then he left, and I was alone once more. The first few hours passed quietly as I performed my regular cleaning duties, constantly checking my watch for 1:15 a.m. At 12:45 a.m., I went looking for storage room B and found it where Thomas had indicated. It was a small room filled with artifacts not on public display. The mask was on the 3rd shelf, wrapped in burlap, just as described. I carefully unwrapped it, ensuring I touched only the edges. It was made of dark wood, with a face featuring large, round eyes, a long nose, and a mouth that seemed to be either a smile or a snarl. Small shells and beads adorned its edges, and faded paint marked its features. It unnerved me, but I rewrapped it and carried it to the East Wing. The African art exhibit was dimly lit by emergency lights. An empty stand occupied the center of the display, surrounded by other artifacts in glass cases. I checked my watch, 1:12 a.m. close enough. I unwrapped the mask and placed it on the stand, facing it toward the entrance. As soon as it was in position, the room grew warmer. I hadn't even realized how cold it had been until the warmth returned. "One down, one to go," I muttered. I resumed cleaning, keeping a close eye on the time. At 2:45 a.m., I headed to the multimedia room to find the record player. The room contained various audiovisual equipment from different eras. In the corner stood an old record player with a stack of vinyl records beside it. I flipped through them until I found one marked with a small red dot on the label. It had no title, just a blank white label with that single red dot. I placed it on the turntable and waited, watching the minutes tick by. At exactly 3 a.m., I lowered the needle. Nothing happened. The turntable spun, but no sound emerged. I checked the power indicator. The light was on, but something was wrong with either the record or the player itself. I fiddled with the volume knob. Still nothing. Panic began to set in. I lifted the needle and examined it. A small clump of dust had collected on the tip. I brushed it off and tried again. The seconds ticked by. 3:01 a.m. Still no sound. That's when I noticed the temperature plummeting. My breath began to fog in front of my face. The walls around me seemed to darken, and I realized it wasn't a shadow. A dark mist was seeping through the plaster, filling the room. I frantically checked the record player again, looking for anything obvious. Power on. Needle down. Record spinning. Why wasn't it playing? The mist continued to spread, gathering in the corners and flowing along the floor toward my feet. The cold became intense, making my lungs ache with each breath. I noticed a switch on the back of the player labeled speaker. It was set to off. With trembling hands, I flipped it on and adjusted the volume. Immediately, a low, buzzing sound filled the room, a single, sustained note that seemed to vibrate through the walls. The mist halted its advance. It hung in the air for a moment, then began to recede back into the walls, vanishing within seconds. The temperature returned to normal. The record continued to play that monotonous tone. I stood perfectly still, afraid to touch anything until it finished, about 5 minutes later. When silence returned, I carefully placed the record back with the others and left the multimedia room, closing the door firmly behind me. The rest of the night passed without incident. At 6 a.m., Thomas arrived, handing over another envelope of cash without any questions. Instead of going straight home, I headed to the Boston Public Library when it opened. The encounter with the mist had convinced me I needed to understand what was happening at the museum. The library was quiet, with only a few early patrons scattered about. I approached the reference desk and requested information about the Museum of Fine Arts, specifically its history and founding. The librarian directed me to several books and archived newspaper collections. I spent hours sifting through the material, most of which contained only standard information. Then I found it, a small article from 1897 about the construction of the museum's original building. According to the article, the site had previously belonged to a society called the Order of Ancient Observation, which had conducted what the reporter delicately termed unusual ceremonies of a spiritual nature there for decades. Another book, A History of Occult Practices in New England, mentioned the museum briefly. One paragraph caught my attention, the private collection of William Richardson, which formed the foundation of several prominent Boston Museum collections, was rumored to contain artifacts from supernatural investigations worldwide. Richardson, known publicly as an anthropologist and art collector, privately documented encounters with what he termed entities beyond the veil of normal perception. Most scholars dismiss these accounts as products of the Victorian fascination with spiritualism. I closed the book, my mind racing. Thomas's residence, the suited man with no eyes, the black mist, the precise rituals disguised as job instructions, it all pointed to something far more dangerous than ordinary museum security. I gathered my notes and left the library, unsure if I was uncovering the truth or simply feeding my own paranoia. Either way, I knew I would return to the museum that night. I finished my second night without any further incidents. The envelope of cash Thomas handed me at 6 a.m. eased my anxieties considerably. $400 for 2 nights' work. At this rate, I'd catch up on my rent within weeks. When I arrived for my third night, Thomas greeted me in the lobby with yet another list. This one contained 3 items. 1. At 11:30 p.m., move the blue vase from the Asian antiquity section to the storage closet by the staff bathroom. 2. At 2:15 a.m., light the 3 candles in the Colonial America exhibit for exactly 7 minutes, then extinguish them. 3. At 4:45 a.m., place the small wooden box from the director's office on the 3rd step of the main staircase. That's it? I asked, scanning the short list. Thomas nodded. The tasks vary in complexity, not just quantity. Follow them precisely. I pocketed the list, These things I'm doing, they seem random. They serve their purpose, Thomas said, already walking toward the exit. He paused at the door. Oh, and Mr. Bennett, the basement restriction only applies until midnight. After that, you're free to go down there if needed. That caught my attention. In our first meeting, he'd been adamant about avoiding the basement until 12:30 a.m. Now, midnight was fine. Before I could ask about the discrepancy, he was gone. I spent the first few hours cleaning and contemplating what I'd found at the library. The Order of Ancient Observation. William Richardson's collection. At 11:30 p.m., I moved the blue vase as instructed. Nothing unusual happened. I kept cleaning, watching the clock. As midnight approached, I found myself increasingly drawn to the basement door. The rule that was about to expire had made me intensely curious. At exactly midnight, I stood before the basement door. The strange moaning sounds from my first night were absent. The door looked ordinary enough, old wood with a brass knob. I should have focused on my cleaning duties. I should have been preparing for the candle lighting. Instead, I took out my key ring and found the one labeled B. The lock turned easily. The door swung open to reveal a dark staircase descending into the unknown. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it into the darkness, illuminating concrete steps leading down. I paused at the threshold. Thomas hadn't actually told me to go down there, he'd only said I could if needed. Did I need to? No. Did I want to understand what was happening in this museum? Absolutely. I stepped onto the first stair, then the second. The door remained open behind me, casting a sliver of dim light from the hallway above. The air grew colder as I descended, carrying a musty smell of old paper and something else, something like wet stone and decay. The basement was larger than I'd expected. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing rows of storage shelves laden with cardboard boxes, wooden crates, and plastic containers. Dust-covered display cases lined one wall. The floor was bare concrete, stained in places. I walked between the shelves, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. Most boxes were labeled with exhibit names and dates, clearly old displays retired from the main areas. At the far end of the room, partly concealed behind a tall metal shelf, I noticed a section of wall that looked different. Unlike the painted cinder block elsewhere, this section appeared to be made of fitted stone, like something from a much older building. I pushed the shelf aside, wincing at the scraping noise. Behind it was a door, or rather, a stone rectangle carved to resemble a door, with no visible handle or hinges. Strange symbols I didn't recognize were carved around its edges. I ran my fingers over the carvings, tracing their angular shapes. As I touched the last symbol at the bottom right corner, I heard a faint click. The stone rectangle shifted inward about an inch. I placed my hands against it and pushed. It swung inward surprisingly easily, revealing a small chamber beyond. My flashlight illuminated a circular room about 15 feet across. The walls, floor, and ceiling were covered with more of those strange symbols, arranged in circles and intersecting lines. In the center stood a stone pedestal with a leather-bound book resting on it. I stepped inside, drawn to the book. The air here felt different, heavier, charged with something I couldn't explain. The symbols on the floor created patterns that made me dizzy if I looked at them too long. The book was old, its leather cracked and faded. A brass clasp held it closed, but the lock was broken. The cover bore no title, only a symbol matching one carved into the floor, a circle with a triangle inside it, and a spiral in the center. I hesitated before touching it. This felt like crossing a line, moving from simple curiosity to active intrusion. But I had come this far. I opened the book. The yellowed pages were covered in neat handwriting. The first page bore a name and date, William Richardson, 1872. Below that was a title, a record of containments and observations. I turned the page and began to read. Having now secured 13 entities of varying strength and malevolence, I must record the methods of their containment for those who will maintain my work after I am gone. Each entity requires specific rituals to remain bound to its chosen vessel. Failure to perform these rituals will result in temporary release of the entity, during which time it may seek a new host or attempt to break its bonds entirely. My hands trembled as I turned to the next page. A detailed drawing depicted a tall, thin figure in a suit with empty eye sockets leaking black fluid. It was labeled the Watcher, and below it was a list of containment procedures, including regular verbal assertions of ownership of the space. I flipped through more pages, finding descriptions and drawings of other entities, a swirling mass labeled the Formless, a creature of mist called the Cold Breath, and others with equally ominous names. Each entry included specific rituals for keeping them contained. One page detailed the Doorway Guardian, described as a black mass that tested boundaries and looked for weaknesses in containment. The ritual required moving it to a specific location at a specific time using indirect contact. I recognized it immediately as the tripping hazard from my first night. I was stunned. The strange tasks Thomas had me performing weren't random busy work. They were containment rituals designed to keep these entities bound to their vessels. I wasn't just a night custodian. I was performing magic, or something close enough that the distinction didn't matter. I checked my watch. 1:58 a.m. I'd been in the basement for nearly 2 hours. The candle ritual was due in 17 minutes. I quickly photographed several pages with my phone, then closed the book and returned it to the pedestal. As I left the chamber, I carefully pulled the stone door closed behind me. It settled back into place with a soft grinding sound, the symbols realigning. I made it back upstairs just in time to light the candles in the Colonial America exhibit. As I watched the flames flicker for exactly 7 minutes before extinguishing them, I couldn't help but wonder what entity this ritual was containing, and what might happen if I failed. The rest of the night passed in a blur of anxiety and revelation. I completed the final task, placing the wooden box on the 3rd step of the main staircase, with a new understanding of its purpose. Every action I took now felt significant. When Thomas arrived at 6 a.m., I was waiting for him in the lobby, the journal photos open on my phone. "I need to talk to you," I said, holding up the phone to show him Richardson's handwriting. Thomas's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. He took out his phone and made a call. "Janet, tell the board I'll be late this morning. Something's come up." He ended the call and turned to me. "Let's go to my office." Once inside, he closed the door and sat behind his desk. "You found the chamber and the journal. These tasks you've been giving me," I said, "they're rituals. Containment rituals." Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes." "For what? Demons? Ghosts?" "We don't use those terms," Thomas said. "We call them entities. Or residents, informally." "So what you're saying," I continued, "is that this museum is full of what exactly?" "Evil spirits trapped in artwork." "Not just artwork," Thomas corrected. "Objects. Artifacts. The physical vessels vary. And they're not all evil, strictly speaking. Some are simply other, existing according to rules different from our own." I paced across the office, trying to process this information. "And these rituals keep them trapped inside their vessels." "Contained," Thomas corrected. "Not trapped. This is their home now. We maintain the boundaries. Establish the rules of coexistence." "The man in the suit," I said. "The one with no eyes. What is he?" "He is contained within the portrait in the 2nd floor exhibition room," Thomas replied. "The painting of the Victorian gentleman. That's William Richardson himself. The entity you saw is connected to that painting, though we don't know exactly how it came to be." Richardson never explained that part in his journals. I stopped pacing and faced Thomas. We're not just custodians, are we? A slight smile touched Thomas's lips. No, Mr. Bennett. We're wardens. Guards. What the museum shows the public isn't its true purpose. Its true purpose is containment. And what happens if these rituals aren't performed? If these entities get out? Thomas's smile faded. The suited man is one of the weaker ones. If you ever saw what's in the basement after hours, you wouldn't survive. A chill ran down my spine. What's in the basement after hours? Something ancient. Something that should never have been brought back. Richardson found it in a temple in Cambodia. He thought he could study it, contain it. He was partially right. Thomas leaned forward. The basement restriction isn't just for your safety. It's when we allow that particular entity limited freedom within a controlled space. And the other night guards? The ones before me. Most quit when they realized what was happening, Thomas said. A few ignored the rules, tried to interact with the entities directly. They disappeared. Disappeared? Or were killed? Consumed would be more accurate, Thomas said flatly. The entities require energy to remain contained. When their rituals are neglected or performed incorrectly, they seek that energy from living sources. I sank into the chair across from Thomas, my legs suddenly weak. Why me? Why hire someone who doesn't know what's going on? Because those who seek out this kind of knowledge usually want to use it, Thomas replied. They come with agendas, with desires for power or understanding that the entities can exploit. I need someone practical. Someone who follows instructions precisely, not out of belief or ambition, but out of simple professionalism. And who you can pay well enough that they won't quit even when things get weird, I added. Thomas nodded slightly. Yes. That too. I looked down at the photos on my phone, instructions for containing bizarre creatures, written nearly 150 years ago by a man whose portrait now housed one of those creatures. There are 13 of them. I asked, remembering the journal. 13 major ones, Thomas confirmed, plus a few minor manifestations that require less rigorous containment. Richardson collected them over decades of travel. Some he sought out. Others found him. I thought about the black mist, the tentacle-like mass, the suited man, and according to Thomas, these were among the weaker entities. So what now? I asked. Now that I know. Now you have a choice, Thomas said. You can walk away. I won't stop you. Or you can continue with full knowledge of what you're doing and why. At the same pay rate. Thomas actually chuckled at that. Yes, Mr. Bennett. At the same pay rate. I thought about my empty bank account, my mounting bills, the job market that had rejected me for months. Then I thought about the suited man saying, I belong here. And the black mist retreating when the record started playing. I'll stay, I said. But I want to know what I'm dealing with. No more mysteries. If I'm containing these things, I need to understand them. Thomas nodded. Fair enough. Richardson's journals contain everything. I'll let you see them, the real ones, not just what you found in the hidden chamber. But understand this, knowing about the entities can make you a target. They're aware. They watch. They test boundaries. Like the front doors opening by themselves. Exactly like that, Thomas said. When you're here alone at night, you're not just a custodian or a security guard. You're the only thing standing between them and freedom. Remember that. I left the museum that morning with a new set of instructions for my fourth night, a copy of Richardson's second journal, and a head full of thoughts about the 13 contained entities. As I walked home in the early dawn light, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a tall figure in a black suit following me. The museum looked ordinary from the outside, grand and impressive. But now I knew its true nature, a place that kept dangerous things locked away, where night guards did more than just watch empty rooms. And I had just agreed to be one of them. The next few nights settled into a tense but manageable routine. Armed with Richardson's journal and Thomas's clear instructions, I performed each ritual precisely as required. The entities stayed in their places, though I often felt their watchful presence as I moved through the dark halls. The suited man appeared in his portrait room on schedule. The black mass stayed where it belonged. The mist remained trapped behind the walls. I was growing accustomed to this strange coexistence. By my fourth night, I had nearly caught up on my back rent. Another week, and I could start on my credit card debt. The financial pressure was easing. The job was terrifying, but I knew I had made the right decision. When I arrived for my fifth night shift, however, something was clearly wrong. Red and blue lights flashed across the museum's facade. 2 police cars were parked haphazardly near the entrance, their doors left open. A small group of officers stood in the lobby, speaking in low, serious tones. I stopped at the bottom of the steps. Should I turn around? Leave? But if I didn't perform the containment rituals tonight, I remembered Thomas's warning about what would happen if the entities got free. I couldn't walk away. I approached cautiously, showing my museum ID to an officer who moved to block my path. I work here, I explained. Night custodian. I'm supposed to start my shift now. The officer examined my ID, then nodded toward a man in plain clothes speaking with one of the day security guards. Detective Rollins wants to talk to everyone who works here. Wait over there. I joined a small group of museum employees near the information desk, all murmuring worriedly. What's going on? I asked. A security guard turned to me. Thomas Green is missing. Didn't show up for work today. Didn't call. His assistant went to check on him at home and found his place empty, with signs of a struggle. My stomach tightened. Thomas missing? He was the only one who fully understood the containment system, the only one who knew all the rituals. When was the last time anyone saw him? I asked. Yesterday evening, one of the curators said. He stayed late to finish some paperwork. I left around 7 o'clock, and he was still in his office. That meant he disappeared sometime after 7 p.m. the previous day and before this morning. Had something happened after I left at 6 a.m.? The detective finished his conversation and walked over. I'm Detective Rollins, he announced, showing his badge. I need to speak with each of you individually about Thomas Green. Who saw him last? No one volunteered. The curator repeated her account. What about you? Rollins asked, looking at me. You're the night guy, right? Bennett. I nodded. I saw him yesterday morning when I finished my shift at 6 o'clock. He seemed normal. Just gave me my instructions for tonight and sent me home. Instructions? Rollins raised an eyebrow. What kind of instructions? I scrambled for an answer that wouldn't sound insane. Just cleaning priorities. Which exhibits needed attention, that sort of thing. Can I see these instructions? He gives them to me verbally. I lied. I couldn't show him the list of containment rituals. How would I explain placing tribal masks on pedestals at specific times? Rollins studied me for a moment, then pulled out a small notebook. Did Mr. Green mention any concerns? Anyone who might wish him harm? Any unusual visitors? I shook my head. No, nothing like that. The detective questioned me for another 10 minutes about my relationship with Thomas, how long I'd worked there, my duties. I kept my answers vague, hoping he wouldn't press for details. Finally, Rollins closed his notebook. "We'll be conducting a complete search of the museum. You can all go back to your regular duties. If you remember anything that might be important, call me." He handed out business cards. As the others dispersed, I remained rooted to the spot. A complete search of the museum. What if they found Richardson's journals? Or worse, what if they disturbed one of the containment vessels? "Detective," I said quickly, "about the search. Will it interfere with the museum's operations? I have specific tasks that need to be completed tonight." Rollins gave me an odd look. The janitor is worried about cleaning schedules while his boss is missing. I tried to appear responsible rather than panicked. "It's just that Mr. Green is very particular about certain exhibits being maintained a certain way." "We'll try not to get in your way," Rollins said dismissively. "But finding Mr. Green is our priority." The police spent the next hour searching, focusing on Thomas's office and administrative areas. I cleaned nervously nearby, watching as they rifled through papers and checked closets. None of them ventured into the exhibition areas or basement, much to my relief. By 10 p.m., they had found nothing useful and began to leave. Rollins was the last to go, pausing at the front doors to issue a final warning. "Don't touch anything in Green's office. We may need to return for a more thorough examination." I promised to leave everything untouched, then locked the doors behind him. As his car pulled away, I leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Thomas was gone. I was now the only person who knew about the entities, the only one who could maintain the containments. I pulled out the list of instructions Thomas had given me for tonight. 3 tasks. 1. At 11:45 p.m., replace the faded red book on the third shelf of the rare books exhibit with the identical volume from the director's office. 2. At 2:30 a.m., move the small jade figurine in the Asian artifacts display 3 inches to the left. 3. At 4 a.m., place 3 white roses in the vase next to the Renaissance painting of the woman in blue. Simple enough, though now I understood that each task maintained the boundary between our world and whatever these entities truly were. I needed to follow these instructions perfectly, especially with Thomas gone. I started my normal cleaning routine, keeping one eye on the clock. The museum felt different tonight, tense, expectant, as if the building itself knew its master was missing. At 11:30 p.m., I went to Thomas's office to retrieve the red book. The room was exactly as the police had left it, desk drawers pulled open, papers scattered, chairs askew. I found the book where Thomas had said it would be, on the shelf behind his desk. As I reached for it, I noticed something unusual, a sealed envelope with my name on it, tucked between the book and the shelf. I stared at it, tempted to open it immediately, but checked my watch, 11:38 p.m. The ritual came first. I pocketed the envelope and took the book to the rare books exhibit, completing the replacement precisely at 11:45 p.m. Back in the break room, I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter in Thomas's neat handwriting. "Mr. Bennett, if you are reading this, I am no longer able to serve as warden of the museum. I have watched your work carefully these past nights and believe you have the right qualities to take my place. The entities will test you, especially now. Trust Richardson's journals and your own instincts. Should anything happen to me, you will find complete instructions in the false bottom of the leftmost drawer in my desk. The key is taped beneath the 3rd step of the basement stairs. Remember, the museum must never be left unattended during night hours. The consequences would be catastrophic. Thomas Green." The letter slipped from my fingers. Thomas had prepared for his own disappearance. He had chosen me as his successor. But why? What had happened to him? I checked my watch again, 1:45 a.m. Still time before my next task. I decided to find the key. The basement stairs creaked under my weight as I descended. I found the key exactly where the letter had indicated, taped to the underside of the third step. It was small and old-fashioned, made of tarnished brass. Back in Thomas's office, I unlocked the leftmost drawer and felt around for the false bottom. A wooden panel lifted away, revealing a leather-bound notebook and a set of keys labeled with names I didn't recognize: Richardson Study, Archives Vault. I flipped through the notebook. It contained detailed instructions for every containment ritual, organized by day of the week and time of year. Tonight's rituals matched what Thomas had given me, but there were dozens more, a complex calendar of tasks that maintained the barriers. A notation at the bottom of today's page caught my eye: warning, 5th day rituals most vulnerable to interference. Monitor closely. I checked my watch, 2:22 a.m. I had 8 minutes to move the jade figurine. I tucked the notebook into my pocket and hurried to the Asian artifacts display. The figurine sat on a small pedestal inside a glass case. I unlocked the case with my master key and carefully moved it exactly 3 inches to the left. As soon as it was in position, I felt a subtle change in air pressure, as if the building had exhaled. I relocked the case and resumed my duties, checking my watch frequently. Everything seemed to be proceeding smoothly despite Thomas's absence, until 3:15 a.m. I was cleaning windows in the Greek antiquity section when I heard it, a wet, slithering sound emanating from the direction of the basement door. Simultaneously, the temperature plummeted. My breath clouded in front of my face. I turned slowly, already knowing something was terribly wrong. Black liquid oozed from beneath the basement door, spreading across the floor in pulsing tendrils. This wasn't supposed to happen. The entity in the basement should have been contained. A movement in my peripheral vision made me spin around. There, at the end of the hallway, stood the suited man, not in his portrait room where he belonged, but free in the corridor. His empty eye sockets leaked that same black fluid, creating trails down his gaunt face. Multiple containment breaches at once. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. I backed away, mind racing. If someone had sabotaged the containments, I needed to know which ones and how to fix them. I ran for the security office, where monitors displayed feeds from cameras throughout the museum. Looking at the screens, I saw more signs of breach: mist seeping from walls in the European gallery, display cases vibrating in the Egyptian exhibit, shadows moving against the light in the American wing. And then I saw her, a woman in dark clothes, moving purposefully through the East Wing, taking objects from their displays and placing them in wrong positions. The saboteur. I watched as she lifted a clay idol from its case and placed it on a windowsill across the room. Immediately, the air around it darkened, and the shadows in that room began to twist unnaturally. I grabbed a flashlight and Thomas's notebook, frantically flipping to the section on containment breaches. The instructions were clear: return all objects to their proper positions before dawn, or the entities would fully manifest and escape. I ran toward the East Wing, taking service corridors to avoid the suited man and the spreading black liquid. The museum had become a maze of dangers, with entities pushing against their weakened boundaries throughout the building. I found the woman in the African art exhibit, just as she was removing a ceremonial mask from its display stand. She was middle-aged, with sharp features and calculating eyes. Something about her seemed familiar, though I was certain we had never met. "Stop!" I shouted, more forcefully than intended. She turned, surprised but not frightened. The mask dangled from her hand. "Well," she said, looking me up and down. "You must be the new night guard." "Bennett, right?" "Put the mask back," I demanded, stepping closer. "You don't know what you're doing." She laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the empty gallery. "I know exactly what I'm doing. Thomas said you'd be trouble. He didn't think you'd figure it out so quickly." "Thomas? You know where he is. Let's just say he's been contained." She smiled at her own joke. "I worked here for 7 years. 7 years watching Thomas perform his little rituals, keeping all that power locked away. He never trusted me enough to share the truth. That's why she seemed familiar. Her photo might have been in employee files I'd seen during training. "You're Janet Fisher," I realized. Thomas's former assistant. Former assistant, she corrected. Future master. The entities are wasted here, trapped in these objects. Do you have any idea what they can do? What they can give to someone who frees them? They're dangerous, I said, taking another step toward her. You can't control them. Janet's expression hardened. Control them? No. But I can bargain with them. They offered me power in exchange for freedom. Real power, Bennett. The kind that changes lives. They're lying to you, I insisted. They'll consume you the moment they're free. That's what Thomas said when he fired me, Janet sneered. He caught me talking to the suited man. Thought I was compromised. He was right, of course, but too late. I'd already made my deal. She placed the mask on the floor, face up. Immediately, the eyes of the mask began to glow with a dull red light. The temperature in the room dropped further. I lunged forward, grabbing for the mask, but Janet was faster. She kicked it across the floor, sending it sliding under a display case. Good luck putting everything back before dawn, she taunted. I've moved 17 objects. The containments are failing as we speak. She turned and ran. I had a split-second decision, chase her or retrieve the mask. The mask had to come first. I dropped to my knees, reaching under the display case until my fingers touched wood. I pulled it out and returned it to its stand. The red glow faded from its eyes. 1 down. 16 to go. I checked Thomas's notebook, matching objects to their proper locations. The clay idol in the east wing. A bronze dagger in the medieval exhibit. A small mirror in the Victorian display. Each one had been moved to disrupt its containment. I rushed through the museum, racing against time. The suited man appeared twice more in my path, forcing me to find alternate routes. The black liquid from the basement had spread throughout the first floor, making certain corridors impassable. Fog and darkness filled entire rooms. By 5:30 a.m., I had restored 15 of the 17 objects. Dawn was approaching. I could see the sky lightening through the museum windows. The entities grew more agitated as their freedom slipped away. Wind howled through the building, though no windows were open. Displays rattled. Lights flickered. I found the 16th object, a small silver box hidden behind a statue in the sculpture garden, and returned it to its velvet cushion in the jewelry exhibit. Then I checked the notebook for the final item, the clay idol. According to the diagram, it belonged in a specific case in the Mesopotamian gallery. A case I hadn't yet checked because the black liquid had blocked the main entrance to that wing. I took the service elevator to the second floor, hoping to enter the gallery from above. The doors opened to a terrifying sight. The suited man stood directly before me, black fluid now streaming from his eye sockets. Behind him, Janet Fisher held the clay idol. Too late, she said. The final containment is breaking. Can you feel it? I could. The air felt different, thick and difficult to breathe. Through the windows, the sky was turning grey with approaching dawn. Minutes, maybe seconds remained. The entities won't give you what you want, I said, trying to keep her talking while I inched forward. They'll destroy everything, including you. You sound just like Thomas, she replied. So certain you know their true nature. They're not evil, Bennett. They're just different, operating under different rules. Then why is he here? I nodded toward the suited man. Why is he guarding you? Janet glanced at the entity, then back at me. He's not guarding me. He's waiting." The suited man took a step toward her. Janet's confident expression faltered. "Give me the idol," I said quietly. "It's not too late." For a moment, Janet hesitated. The suited man moved closer, his blank face turning toward her. She clutched the idol tightly. I saw my opening and lunged forward, snatching the idol from her hands. I turned and ran for the Mesopotamian gallery. Behind me, Janet screamed, a sound cut terribly short. I didn't look back. The gallery was dark, lit only by emergency lights. I found the case where the idol belonged and placed it on its stand. As soon as it was in position, a shockwave of energy rippled through the museum. The building shuddered once, then fell silent. I turned. The suited man stood in the doorway. We stared at each other, me breathing hard, him utterly still. Then slowly, he began to fade, his body becoming translucent until nothing remained but a few drops of black liquid on the floor. I ran back to where I had left Janet, but she was gone. No body. No blood. No sign she had ever existed. Just an empty corridor. By the time the first morning staff arrived at 6:30 a.m., I had cleaned up what little evidence remained of the night's events. The entities had returned to their vessels. The museum looked normal, except for Thomas Green, who was still missing. I waited in the lobby, Thomas's notebook and keys in my pocket. The sun was up. I was exhausted but alert, still trying to process everything that had happened. A courier arrived at 7:15 a.m. with a package addressed to me. Inside was an envelope containing legal documents, dated the previous day and signed by Thomas, granting me authority over the museum's special collections. Also inside was a handwritten note. "The responsibility is now yours."